In the fall of 1864, the Confederacy began to look for a site for a new prisoner of war camp. They needed one because the infamous camp at Andersonville had become so horrendously overcrowded. As they crossed across the state of Georgia looking for a site, they ultimately settled on acreage just outside of Millen, Georgia, only about 40 miles from Georgia Southern University. And there in October of 1864, they started the construction of what they termed as the largest prisoner of war camp in the world. Almost 42 acres were stockaded around and prepared to hold tens of thousands of soldiers for the war. Ultimately, most of the prisoners came from Andersonville, were moved into what was known as Camp Lawton, and for 6 weeks in 1864, it held over 10,000 Union prisoners of war. It didn't last much longer than that because the Confederacy, while they had originally found a site they thought was deep into the South and safe, they never expected Sherman's march to the sea. And as he moved out of Atlanta and towards Savannah, he sent out his cavalry ahead to hopefully liberate the prisoners at Lawton. However, the Confederates figured out they were coming and quickly moved the prisoners out to other sites around the state and in the South. 4 days later, when the cavalry arrived, they burned what was left of Camp Lawton and moved on. In 1939, the Triple C started working in the area to build what is now Magnolia Springs State Park, and most of the camp lies on the park property and on national property next door to it from the fish hatchery. In 2009, though, Georgia Southern University started a unique ongoing project to begin to research and excavate the site to better understand what was left, and in fact found an incredibly pristine preserved site of this prisoner of war camp, one of the few left from the Civil War. And so if you're interested in seeing more about those excavations and some of the artifacts from that, please go to the website at the Department of Sociology and Anthropology's Camp Lawton program. But we're here to also talk about, with that introduction, some really unique artifacts in the collection of the museum that help us preserve the history and the story of Camp Lawton. So the museum has some really unusual and some valuable artifacts related to the history of Camp Lawton in its collection. Probably most importantly, we have 2 of only 3 known letters ever written from Camp Lawton that still survive. And extraordinarily enough, one of those is from a prisoner, Union prisoner, and one of them is from a guard from Georgia, from the reserve troops here. The first one we'll talk about is from Charles H. Knox. And Charles Knox was a Union cavalry officer from New York, who lived in New York, and he is writing in November of 1864 back to his wife. And he's talking about the typical kinds of things that a prisoner of war might talk about. He's trying to reassure his wife that he's okay and that maybe there's something hopeful in the future. So in fact, he writes, "I was captured on the 5th of May last and have seen hard times since, but now hoping the scene may soon change. For we all look for an exchange of most, if not all, the prisoners that are here. God knows I hope so, for I am tired of secession," as he calls the South. He's also trying to help his wife hundreds and hundreds of miles away. He's trying to help her to manage the farm, their farm together. Something she, as many women, both North and South, no longer had their husbands with them, are struggling to try and do. And so here in a prison, he's writing to try and give her advice. He writes, "If you want any money, write to Martin," that's his brother. "If he is alive, for that he is owing me, it is $9.50 that will help you some." He also says, "Do you think it is for the best? Do what you think is for the best as it regards our affairs. Perhaps you had better sell the cow if hay is dear." Likewise, H.V. Harris was a guard at Camp Lawton. He had been at Andersonville and moved down here, and the other letter that survives is written from him in October of 1864, before the prisoners had been moved there, and they're still building the camp. And he tells a little bit about his experience. And again, food is an important part of this and how difficult it is. It says, "Provision is scarce. We get 1 pound of beef to the man for 1 day's rations every other day, and the next day about 1/2 pint or a little more of green syrup for a man, and some peas that the weevils has eaten almost up. I can't eat a bite of the syrup," he writes. He sees other things for sale on the road nearby, but the prices are too exorbitant for him. He has hoped to get supplies sent to him from his family, but they missed him and probably gotten eaten by someone else. But mostly he's also afraid of what's happening to his family back up in the Atlanta area that he's writing to. He knows, in fact, and has heard the stories, that not only the Union Army under Sherman, but the Confederate Army under Hood is pressing or taking livestock and provisions from the families there to help support the army there. And he writes, in fact, "All that I am afraid of is that my folks at home will suffer if their stuff is taken away from them. And from the news that I frequently hear from our country, I am afraid that they don't tell me the worst that is going on up there." So both of these men survive the war. H.V. Harris goes back to his family. Charles Knox goes back to his, and in fact, we have some other documents related to him after the war, including his certificate as part of the organization, the first POW advocacy organization, the National Association of Union Ex-Prisoners of War, and the medal that he got as a POW from the Civil War. And both of them survived and live on. But unfortunately, part of the story at Camp Lawton is, even though it was open for only 6 weeks, hundreds of Union soldiers died and perished there, and were buried in what was a large trench that became Lawton National Cemetery later after the war, and then ultimately were moved to Beaufort, South Carolina. And we do have one other piece in the collection, this extraordinary carte de visite, or photograph, that was sent home to a family by a soldier. He got his picture taken and sent it home and signed it at the bottom. "Yours truly, John C. Irwin, Company H, 53rd Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry." But the poignant part is up above, where the family, in a different handwriting, wrote later on in the album that this came out from, "Died at Millen, Georgia, a prisoner of war, October 25th, 1864. So these extraordinary pieces are just a few as we continue to collect other pieces to help interpret and preserve this extraordinary story and this site here at Georgia Southern University.